QSO Today, episode 286, Mike Foerster W0IH. This episode of QSO Today is sponsored by ICOM America, makers of the finest HF, VHF, and UHF transceivers and accessories for the radio amateur, reminding you that they have just the right rig for contesters, DXers, and ragchewers. And by QRP Labs, makers of the popular QCX kit transceiver and a whole host of parts and kits for the ham radio builder. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for sponsoring the QSO Today podcast. Welcome to the QSO Today podcast. I'm Eric Guth Foerster W0IH, your host. My QSO Today is with Mike Foerster W0IH, who loves to ragchew with his friends on 80 meters in the evening. Mike is a frequent contributor to QST magazine with articles on finding and solving electronic noise problems, remote control of your HF station while on the road, and his broadband adjustable 80-meter dipole. All this is the center of our discussion on this QSO Today. W0IH, this is Eric, Foerster W0IH. Are you there, Mike?
Yeah, hello, Eric. Foerster W0IH, W0IH. Nice to talk to you, Eric.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as well, Mike. Thanks for joining me on the QSO Today podcast. Can we start at the beginning of your ham radio story? When and how did it start for you?
Yeah, I guess for me, it was back when I was in high school. I got started with shortwave listening and picked up one of the old Night Kit Star Roamers. And this was as a kit, so I put it together and I kind of learned the soldering and everything there and really enjoyed that. And from there, I ended up getting my novice license. And I believe a senior in high school about that time.
So you're about age 18?
Yep, 17, 18, something like that, right.
What year was that?
1968.
And do you remember what your call sign was?
Oh, yes. It was WN0VNH. Very nasty ham.
But certainly that wasn't the case.
Oh, no.
What was the hometown?
Laverne, Minnesota. It's in the southwestern corner of Minnesota.
And you're still in Minnesota?
Right. Now we're in the southeastern corner of Minnesota. Just kind of been a little bit everywhere in Minnesota over the years.
And I understand Minnesota is cold this time of year.
Oh, yes. A lot of snow, a lot of cold, and it's always the big joke is putting up antennas, but you have to wait until it snows.
Is that just because you forget to do the antenna projects when the weather is warm?
Yeah, like I say, it's kind of the joke, but it always seems like the antenna projects want to come up during the winter and stuff like that. But no, not too often. I don't climb towers when it's cold. I pretty much try to stay off towers in this kind of weather. So.
That seems to make sense. Now, what kind of tower complex do you have outside of your QTH now?
Actually, it's just a single tower, not so much a complex, but very happy to have one. When we moved into this QTH about 20 years ago, decided I was going to put up a tower, and it's a 48-foot HDBX tower. We're kind of lucky in a way down in a valley where we don't get a lot of winds. So it's not so tough on the antennas and things like that, but it's a 48-foot, and then I've got a TH11DX beam up there, and I've got my dipoles hung from that as well for 80 meters and 160 meters. The 160-meter antenna, I have some really great neighbors. It goes from one neighbor's tree, and the other side goes across the street into a neighbor across the road. So I get to have a full-size 160-meter dipole.
Well, that's amazing. And didn't you say in an article someplace that you actually had a neighbor that actually had another tower?
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I've got a next-door neighbor, Tom, K-A-0-M-L-O, and he's got a high tower in his backyard that he hasn't used. Actually, about 5 years ago, his antenna got hit by lightning and started his house on fire. And so we kind of all in the neighborhood sat out in the backyard there and watched the firemen put out the fire. But after they finished rebuilding his house, they left a scaffolding around his tower. And keep in mind, this is only about 100 foot away from my tower. So I was really lucky that I didn't get hit. But, unfortunately he was. But I got to help him put that back together, so I made sure we put in a real good ground plane ground rods, 4 ground rods stretched out across there, and put up a new antenna for him, one of the Step IR, and really kind of enjoyed doing that. I like working with antennas, I really do. So, but anyway, you were asking about the high tower. He just doesn't use that. So I played with that, and as a matter of fact, I put a mobile antenna in the middle of it as the tuning coil. That worked out really well.
You wrote an article about that as well.
Yes, I did. I've kind of found that QST, for the articles, they want something that's, a little bit interesting and different and stuff like that. So it's been kind of fun to get a few articles printed.
And not highly technical.
No. As a matter of fact, I don't really get in too deep into antenna modeling, although I have played with a little bit. But it's mostly through experimentation and, like I say, not terribly, terribly technical.
Did ham radio play a part then in the choices that you made for your education and career?
Yes, it did. I had gone to college, and my father wanted me to come back and sell insurance with him, but I wanted to get into electronics. I really enjoyed electronics, so I kind of took another path. My brother took the path of going into business with my father. So, yes, it did make a big impact on my life, and I've always enjoyed electronics, and later years got more into software and stuff like that.
Now, did you get a degree in electronic engineering?
No, I didn't. Actually, I had a technical degree from here in Winona, which I ended up coming back to after about 25 years. But no, I didn't have an engineering degree, but technical.
And so what did you do during those years? What kind of profession did you have?
Started out as a technician repairing circuit boards, and I ended up getting into field service. Did a lot of travel repairing process control computers, and later on I got into management. But the real niche for me I found was in software testing, and in the early years software just didn't make any sense to me, but suddenly everything kind of clicked. So I got into the software testing. So essentially I wrote programs to test programs, and very much enjoyed that, and like I say, I really kind of found my niche in that.
And that came after the personal computer, the PC revolution? Do you think that was part of it, or were you doing this on mini computers?
No, this is mostly done on mini computers and things like that. It was and more dedicated computers for testing and things like that. It was like I say, it was a distributed process control computer system, and used for pulp and paper mills, petrochemical plants, and things like that. And so I did a lot of the testing, and where they required some real good reliability.
Now, you mentioned in your QRZ page that you actually had a ham radio mentor.
Yes, that was Carl, K0QKN. He was actually a welder in the neighborhood where I lived, and I used to go down, and he'd help me with a couple small projects, with welding and things like that. And once he found out that I was interested in shortwave listening and stuff like that, he was started talking to me about ham radio, and it didn't take long before I was hooked. It was just some really wonderful memories that I have once I got my novice license to get on and talk to these people through CW. It was just, I guess in a way, kind of magic. It was fun. It really was. You
mentioned that you had a Nightkit Star roamer that you built. That was the receiver for your novice rig, and what was the transmitter?
That was just to get started. My first rig was a Hot Water 16, the old Heathkit Hot Water 16, and I still remember building that. As a matter of fact, there was another guy in the club there in Laverne that was kind of helped me too, Jim Mitchell, W0MXQ. I still remember him coming over and helping me get that tuned up, and it was trying to get it neutralized. It was breaking into oscillation. I remember him kind of flicking at the light bulb we were using for a dummy load, and it was a lot of fun back then.
Yeah, I remember that rig. That was mine as well. You're in your professional career. You're moving around. Were you active as a ham all these years?
No, I wasn't active all the years. It would come and go a little bit. I remember at one time I had a ICOM 701. It was one of the early solid-state radios, and after about 2 or 3 years, the connector or the band switch on the backside started getting dirty, and it ended up blowing out the finals. And so I put it away in a closet for a while and kind of dropped out of it. Picked it up a couple of years later, worked on it again, and managed to blow out the drivers too. So I put it away, and then I drug it out a few more years later and got it all fixed up and running. And I think since then I've been pretty much active, especially in the last 20 years or so.
What's your favorite operating mode?
Sideband. I love to ragchew. Get on 3 nights a week with a good bunch of friends here in the United States, South Dakota, Missouri, and down in Georgia as well.
Was that 80 meters or 40 meters?
75 meters and sometimes 60 meters, depending on band conditions. But yeah, for me, it's ragchewing.
What is the rig now?
Rig's a Elecraft K3S. I've also got a KPA 500 amplifier, but kind of my favorite right now is the amplifier. It's a homebrew 1 kilowatt amplifier. I built it up off one of the W6PQL kits. That was another article that I wrote that went into the QEX magazine. And I've got an Arduino that runs that. So the Arduino talks between the K3, or actually I can run it with my KX3. Talks to that and keeps reading the frequency, and so it automatically does band changes. It sets up the power, and it also allows me to make sure that I don't mess up and blow something up in the amplifier.
So the amplifier is something that you use when you do the ragchewing in the evening?
Yes, it is.
The W6PQL kit, is that everything, or is that like the essential amplifier and then all of the Arduino system and the controls and stuff, that's all something that you added to enhance the amplifier and its operation?
Yeah, Jim, W6PQL sells basically the amplifier module as a kit, or I think you can buy it assembled. And then some of the other boards like the relay boards and the control board, which all work very well. And then I found my own case for it, and that's right, he also sells the low-pass filter board, the LPF board. So I took those, put those together, and I actually spent about a year working on this and just had an absolute wonderful time. I really did, designing it and everything, and I kept pretty good notes on it. And then decided on the Arduino. I used an Arduino Mega in this case because it's got multiple COM ports to it that will read the frequency and switch the bands. It also turns off the I think it's the K8. I can't remember the module, but the power amplifier module in the K3. It turns that off, so I don't have to worry about ever pushing the amplifier too hard. The amplifier actually takes about 2.5 watts of power in order to get it up to about 1,200 watts. And you want to make sure you don't overdrive it. I do have a 6 dB amplifier in there just because you need to be able to have the resolution. Over the comms, you can only get a 1 watt resolution when you write to the radio. So you can change it from 1 watt to 2 watts to 3 watts. And with the 6 dB amplifier, it gives you a 1/4 watt resolution to increment the power actually going into the amplifier. So learned a lot about it, become very comfortable with the solid state amps, just playing with it.
And how's the KX3 as an exciter for this amplifier?
Works great. Yeah, that was the reason that I used the communications to interface between the two. The K3 has a BCD output, 4 bits that you can read. And I'm actually using that to automatically switch my antennas, but the KX3 doesn't have anything like that, so you have to use comms. And if I want it to be common between both radios, to be able to use either radio, I had to use the communications in order to find out what the frequency the radio was on. But the KX3 works great. Like I say, with 10 watts drive through my 6 dB attenuator, I can get 1,200 watts easy.
I saw on your station picture at your QTH that you also have a Heathkit station. What's the history of that, and what's it doing there?
After I got my general license, I had to get another radio, so I ended up picking up a Heathkit HW100 and put that together. And so I had that for quite a number of years. And going to college, I ended up having to sell that. You needed the money. But then later on, I bought a Heathkit Hot Water 101, HW101, and put that together. And I've always had kind of a soft spot in my heart for the Heathkit. So I found this SB101 on actually it was on eBay sale, and I've kind of built a bit of a station around that, and recently loaned it out, the SB101, to some new hams to get them on the air, and it worked out really well because they ended up picking up a new ICOM 7300, so it really got them going, and I was really proud about that.
That's amazing. And what was the amplifier that you were using with the SB101?
That's an SB221. So that's the version of the amplifier that doesn't have 10 meters in it, but you don't really need amplifier in 10 meters anyway, so I didn't worry about it.
And now this message from ICOM America. It's a new year and a New Year's of savings at ICOM. Bring in the new year loud and clear with some of ICOM's most innovative and interesting transceivers. Start off the new year with a high-performance ICOM IC7610. This direct sampling HF transceiver changes the world's definition of SDR, or software-defined radio. It has the ability to pick up the faintest of signals even in the presence of stronger adjacent signals. Its features include RF direct sampling system, 110 dB RMDR, independent dual receiver, and dual digicell. The ICOM IC7300 changes the way entry-level HF transceivers are designed. Even at its amazing price point, the IC7300 is an innovative SDR transceiver with a beautifully compact design and form factor. It is the HF transceiver now in my shack and has changed my appreciation of what is even possible in the HF bands. Features include RF direct sampling system, 15 discrete bandpass filters, a large 4.3-inch color touchscreen, real-time spectrum scope, and an SD memory card slot. Finally, the ICOM IC9700 was designed and is built with the VHF-UHF weak signal operator in mind, with faster processors, higher input gain, higher display resolution, and a cleaner signal. The ICOM IC9700 is the pinnacle of perfection for all-mode VHF-UHF and 1.2 GHz transceiver. If your New Year's resolution includes operating moon bounce or meteor scatter, then the IC9700 is for you. Features include a 4.3-inch color touchscreen, dual watch operation and full duplex operation in the satellite mode, real-time high-speed spectrum scope and waterfall display, voice recording playback function in an SD memory card, and it supports CW, AM, single sideband, FM, RTTY. So it's a new year, and if Santa didn't bring one of these fine ICOM rigs, now is the time to get it yourself. So bring in the new year loud and clear with some of ICOM's most innovative products. Check out ICOM's website for current promotions on the ICOM IC7610, 7300, and 9700 by clicking on the ICOM banner on this week's show notes page. And when you buy that new ICOM rig, please be sure to tell the dealer that you heard about it here on QSO Today. And now back to our QSO. And what do you think of the SB101 in the application that you would use it, like 80-meter rag chewing?
I like it. There's a bunch of us that get on, and like I mentioned before, with the group. And one night a week, it's usually the night for the old rigs. And so a lot of them have Collins, and I'm kind of the odd man out with a Heath kit.
But it still sounds terrific, right?
Oh, it does. It does. It doesn't have a lot of the features, obviously, that the newer rigs do, and it's more for nostalgia than anything else. So I do like to keep this up. In all honesty, I did sell my the tube amplifier, the SB221, and I've got two other amplifiers here, and just decided there wasn't enough room in the shack for it.
You've written in QST about remote controlling your HF rig. In fact, I think you're probably one of the first to write about remote controlling an HF rig in QST. I think the article was some years back. And including antenna selection and the use of the power amplifier. Can you speak about why you decided to start remotely controlling your HF rig? And did you have an approach that you took in order to be successful at the remote control?
Yeah, it was quite a number of years ago. And as I recall, I was using Skype for the audio, and I had to have a second account so that it was set up so that it would automatically answer when you called in. And then I used TeamViewer in order to control the radio. And and it worked pretty well. It was kind of nice. We would do, short weekends away from home. It was always kind of fun to get on the air with the guys on one of our schedules and stuff like that. So that was kind of what drove me to it. And one of the things that I started getting into more so was making sure that my shack was flexible enough that I could actually control the antennas and stuff like that. So that was one of my first Arduino projects, was reading the BCD output off the K3, running that into the Arduino, and then the Arduino runs a remote antenna switch. And I found that over the years that has been very reliable. It works real good. Occasionally, something would get a little bit messed up, and the computer had to be rebooted or something like that. But my good neighbor Tom K0MLO will occasionally, I'd have him come over and reboot the computer or something like that if I was gone on vacation and couldn't get to it and wanted to get on the air. But things have gotten so much more reliable here in the last few years. But now I run the thing using remote hams, which I really like. As a matter of fact, I've also helped to set up a station for our club. We've got the club got together through donations and put up a ICOM 7300. And the really nice thing is our club has access to a 340-foot tower. And at the 100-foot level, we've got an antenna, ZS6 BKW antenna up there. And anyone in our club has access to it. They can get permission to use it. And it's really nice for some of the new hams that don't have a station yet. We had a guy that just got his license, went from 0 to his extra license, AE0HW, and went from 0 to his extra license all in one shot, which was great. And he got on the air and he was just having a ball. He was talking to South America, to Europe, also South Africa, off in that club station. So,
how does he access it? Is he just using his computer, or does he have to have some remote control head in order to be able to work the station?
No, it's just using the computer. It's a Windows computer through remote hams. And one of the really nice things about the remote hams is it gives you the ability, the granularity to be able to assign permissions to an individual call.
So maybe you need to give me a little bit more background on Remote Hams. Remote Hams is an organization that has a website, and you create an account there. Is that how that works?
Yes, correct. Yeah, you create an account and you upload a copy of your license in case you want to have, allow other, or if you want to get onto somebody else's server, their radio. There are quite a number of them out there, I think, that are open for other people to use, but I think most of them are probably closed in one way or another. Like I say, in the case of our club, it's just to our local club members. I've got my own station here set up, and I typically don't let many others access my station. So I have the granularity to say, this person can get on and use my station, and even, access the amplifier and the rotor and things like that. And it's really good for the club rig. One of the things that has come up recently is this new Raspberry Pi, Rig Pi, the MFJ 1234.
So, in other words, Remote Hams is like a mediation server between users who want to use remote control rigs and the rigs themselves, or the stations themselves. And Remote Hams allows you to control access to which users can find stations. So essentially, if as a user I log into Remote Hams, I have a list of stations that I might be able to access?
Correct. Remote Hams has... there's a server that you can download to your local PC in your shack.
So they have software that's specific to Remote Hams.
Correct. They have software that you download and you connect that up to your radio. And in some cases, like for the K3S, it has a USB, which includes both communications and sound. So that's really about the only cable that you need to hook up to the computer. If in other cases, such as the older K3, which didn't have the sound built into it, you had to hook up the audio.
It had the cat control, right?
Has the cat control.
So you had cat control, and then you had to use separate audio inputs and outputs in order to connect to the computer.
Correct. And once you get that set up, then you would load a client, like on a laptop that you're going to take with you or go someplace else. But it also has the capability of loading up onto a Android phone. And that's really quite functional because we've been driving down the road and my wife driving, and I'll get on the HF, and I can be operating my station at home, driving down the road, and it's so much easier than mobile.
So Remote Hams then has client software for users, and it has server software that goes on, I'm assuming, a PC and maybe now Raspberry Pi that controls, like the 7300, for example, you're actually controlling it through its USB port on the back?
Yes, and that's what we have up at the up at our tower. So there's a server running there with a laptop, and then it goes down to, it's pretty much tied to Windows PCs. There is a client, like I mentioned before, with the Android phones, but there's nothing for iOS or Mac or anything like that. It's just that the group that's put this together,
they're Windows guys.
Yes, they're Windows guys.
Now, is there any encryption or VPN that's running between the client and the station itself?
No, in this case there's not. But I don't know of any security issues that have come up with this.
So I guess I'll have to get some Remote Hams guys that are actually writing the software on the show in order to find out more about Remote Hams. But it sounds very interesting. It sounds like it's an opportunity for people who can't have a station, maybe because, as we mentioned before we started talking, that maybe they go into a retirement home or they move into a no antenna area, and those hams that would like to share their stations with other people. How do they operate? When they operate your station, for example, or they operate the club station, are they using the club station call sign or are they using their call sign?
No, you use your own call sign and you have your own license privileges, general, advanced, whatever, to access that.
Do you have to say that you're actually operating through a club station or a remote station, or do you just sound like you use your own call sign without making any kind of designator that you're operating remotely?
No, you use your own call sign and you access that through, the way that I remember seeing it written up is essentially you've got a long microphone cord.
I see.
But you mentioned about setting up if someone retired or an HOA and things like that. It has occurred to me a number of times that if we ever decided to move from this house, it'd be nice if I could keep the tower and my radio just in the garage and still have access to this system. But I don't know if that would be practical, for me in this case. But in a lot of times, what you find is people that have retirement homes and things like that where they go to, and they still access their radios back home. As a matter of fact, I got on one time on Remote Hams with a group that were talking through a station down in Florida, and they were conversing with some of their friends back up in New York, I believe it was. But there was about 4 or 5 different guys that were actually sharing that same station. So it's more than one person can use that station.
Oh, that's very interesting. I myself, actually, I'm always looking at the ridges around my house and thinking, boy, if I could only have a tower and a box at the bottom of the tower, it would be great to have an HF station that doesn't have the neighborhood noise, which we'll talk about in a few minutes.
Sure.
Anyway, I also you started to mention the RigPi, and the reason I put it in my notes is I saw that you'd actually asked a question in a RigPi forum. What is the RigPi? I think it's a product now sold by MFJ. I think that's where you get it. But what is the RigPi, and how does it work with your remote station?
The RigPi essentially gets to be the server that you connect up your radio to. In this case, it's going to be my Elecraft K3. And you hook your radio up to it, and it becomes a server, and then you can go to any other client and just use a web browser. You do end up having to install Mumble for the audio. That carries the audio from the server to the client. And I think you can also set it up with VPN for a little bit more security, which is probably advisable. But it's kind of a nice, flexible thing that's great for home use. But we kind of looked at it for our club use instead of the remote hams. But it doesn't have the ability to allow one person's, allow certain calls to log in. Basically, you're given one name and password or call and password. And we were just concerned about that getting out of hand.
So it's not compatible with the remote hams in that case. It might actually need maybe more mediation in the middle.
Right. It's not compatible at all with remote hams. It's just another server, another way to serve out the your station at home to being able to operate that station someplace else. So over the internet or whatever. So it's its own system. And it really seems to be quite flexible. I know there's quite a following. I've been following the groups.io for the RigPi, and a lot of guys are really enjoying it.
Let me take a quick break here to tell you about my favorite amateur radio audio podcast, the Ham Radio Workbench Podcast with George, KG6VU, and Jeremy, KF7IJZ, where they pursue topics, technology, and projects on their ham radio workbenches every 2 weeks. George and Jeremy document their projects and make circuit boards available for sale to their listeners. They have interesting guests and go in deep. Even if you're a seasoned ham radio builder or just getting started, be sure to join George and Jeremy for the Ham Radio Workbench podcast. Use the link on this week's show notes page by clicking on the image. And now back to our QSO Today. Now, going back to remote hams for just a final question, will it run on an embedded version of Windows, like Windows 10, for example? So you could run it on a process control computer rather than a big PC?
I don't think so. I mean, the only server they have is one that would load onto Windows 7 or Windows 10 that the server will load onto, and a client is just pretty much the same way. Again, with the exception of the Android client that they have, but it does require a Windows PC to be running. I've got mine set up so that if it's turned off, I can remotely turn the computer on, and then it boots up, and then starts up the whole system. So, but it just depends on what sort of things you get into when trying to set up your remote station.
Now, you mentioned earlier that you have been building some Arduino projects, and some of those Arduino projects are to do antenna switching and stuff like that when you're away. Does your remote ham system, does it allow you to talk to the Arduinos through the computer server itself, or do you speak to the Arduino devices some other IP way?
No, the Arduinos don't talk to the remote hams or anything like that. It's just that like in this case, the Arduino is connected up to the K3. Anytime the K3 turns on, it controls the antenna. So if I change from 160 to 75 to 40, the antenna follows it.
Oh, I see. Oh, that's very cool.
I've used Arduinos also for mobile antenna and had a great time with that. I've had a Yaesu FT100, or actually still have, but I had the ATAS 100 antenna, and I ended up losing that, and so I wanted a little bit better antenna, so I replaced it with a Tar Heels antenna, but I wanted the same functionality for automatic antenna tuning. So I used an Arduino to read the voltage coming out of the Yaesu in order to control the antenna, and it worked very well, and I followed that up with one to go with my KX3 for that same antenna where I'd count the number of turns, and so I could just push a button on the KX3, one of the PF keys, and it would automatically retune to the band that I was on, or it would touch up the SWR. So it would start the antenna moving, and once the counts got close, it would then turn on the transmitter and tweak for the lowest SWR. And that was kind of a fun project.
You're actually sampling the voltage from the SWR bridge and then reducing the voltage as your SWR goes down, the voltage goes down, so you're using the A to D converter in the Arduino?
No, actually, this is all done through communication. As is tuning, I'm just reading the SWR that's coming out of the KXPA 100, just all done through communications.
What's your favorite Arduino project?
It's probably the amplifier, where I've got the Arduino talking to the radio, and gives me the flexibility to control the power on a per band basis and things like that. So yeah, that's probably one. I'm hoping to get into there and make some changes to the way that it communicates. One of the things that you can do with the Elecraft communications and other radios too is you can put it up in an automatic mode where it doesn't send anything out until you make changes to the radio, change bands, change frequency, something like that, and then it would send out those commands automatically. And I kind of want to work through using that rather than just constantly polling the radio, what frequency you're on, what frequency. It keeps asking the frequency in order to change, and I want to update it to use the automatic. That way I'll be able to use this amplifier when I go remote.
Do you build any other Arduino projects maybe related to IoT, Internet of Things? Are you controlling things around your home besides the ham radio shack?
No, I haven't. I find that most of my projects are centered around ham radio one way or another. I built an automatic antenna switch for our remote system at our tower, and it's mostly ham radio centered.
As I was researching this episode today, I noticed that one of the challenges of the 80-meter band is that it's almost impossible to make a wire antenna that's flat from one end of the band to the other. So I saw an article that you wrote in March of 2015 QST where your solution to the 80-meter antenna problem, could you describe what your solution was and how you resolved being able to have a flat antenna across the entire 80-meter band?
Well, I've always wanted to have an antenna that on 75 meters that I could tune, anywhere and have a nice flat SWR. And the dipole that I had pulleys on both ends, just to keep, when the trees move, that the dipole wouldn't break. And I got to thinking about that and wonder what would happen with a pulley in the center. But the trick there is to keep the wires in there as you pull down on them, to keep them from twisting. And so what I did was I used some PVC pipe, 10 foot long, and then there's two pulleys up at the very top in the center, so that as you pull down on the coax, the antenna folds in on itself and changes length. And so you can set that SWR anywhere in the middle, at the band or one of the ends, and it works out very, very well. But like I said, you had to keep it from twisting. So what I did was I took another piece of PVC pipe that slipped inside that outer shell, and it's cut in half vertically to keep, and there's a little car that keeps it from twisting.
In other words, what you're really doing is you're taking the longest, the 80-meter end of the dipole, let's say it's cut for the end of the band, and you're pulling it down inside of a PVC so that essentially you're shortening the antenna, but you still have two wires from the center insulator, right, that are going now straight up through the PVC?
Correct. So essentially that part of the antenna, that antenna becomes a part of the feed line. It works very well for 75. As a matter of fact, I've got two of them hanging up right now, one for 75 and one for 160.
Are you using an Armstrong winch in order to change the antenna tuning, or do you have some kind of motor control?
Nope, right now it's just an Armstrong winch. I do have a clamp that I built for both of them, and I just push the clamp up, and the tower, I've got some tape on the tower, which essentially calibrates where the antenna is. There's a piece of red tape on the coax itself, and then also some pieces of tape above and below that just to show the 2-to-1 points. So all I have to do is walk out there.
In a Minnesota winter, you don't actually have the cable coming through a hole in your wall, and and you've got the winch next to your operating position?
No, but I've thought about it quite a number of times, figuring out a way to put some kind of a winch or something like that. It would take a small one, maybe some 1/8 inch or 16th inch steel cable to be able to pull down on that. It takes a fair amount of pull because there's 5-pound weights on each end of the wire.
How much throw do you need? Are you talking like you actually need like a yard or so to change the length?
the length change would be it's just short of 10 feet, which gives you actually a 20-foot difference in your dipole because you're folding it down on itself.
You could use like a satellite TV actuator arm or something like that to actually pull that thing down, or a screwdriver or something like that.
Yeah, I guess the way that I've thought about it is having a winch motor down there to wind up some cable, like I say, some 16-inch steel cable.
Here I am thinking more complex than it really needs to be.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've been thinking about that for quite a while. As a matter of fact, some of my friends have talked about it when I get in and talking to them. I say, well, I got a little bit of a high SWR. Give me about 60 seconds. And so I have to run outside. And if there's snow...
Got to put on the boots, and you got to... I mean, when I think of Minnesota winters, I think you have to get into your survival gear to go outside.
Oh, it's not that far. It works out very well, I found. I mean, I'm only up, probably about 40 feet for the dipole, and it keeps it flexible enough so I can go anywhere in the band.
It sounds very clever. When you explain it, it makes all the sense in the world. I frankly have never thought about shortening my antenna that way.
I did try to put it on. It seemed to be ideal for 10 through 20 meters. And I did try that, but I found that as I got too far away from the resonant point there, the SWR minimum kept climbing and got too high. So that's maybe a project for some other day to try to figure out what it might do to make it work for 10 to 20 meters, the same concept.
Now, you've been prolific in your writing for QST, and you also wrote an article in the same year in 2015 in February, hunting down RF noise, where you successfully found and worked with a local power company to fix a broken insulator a block or two away from noise that was affecting your HF receiver. Do you have any updates and new thoughts on electric noise and how us hams might be able to combat it?
The basis for that article is really just using a portable phone to set it down by a receiver, and then going around the house, and turning different things off to find out which things would silence the noise, trying to find it in your home, switching breakers off, until the noise went away, that sort of thing. And I was using a portable phone in order to isolate it. It's always a problem. As a matter of fact, I've been fighting another intermittent problem here. I wish I had a better answer. It's been going around the neighborhood with my KX3 and a portable antenna and trying to find out which home in the neighborhood is causing the noise. So.
And how is it when you have to approach a neighbor and tell them that perhaps they have a noise problem, and how do they react?
Actually, I've got really good neighbors here. No one has ever, been upset with me at all. It's everybody kind of seems to know that I'm, the ham in the neighborhood. And as a matter of fact, my next door neighbor, again, as I mentioned, is as well. But he's not quite as active, I guess, as I am. But the neighbors have all been really open to it. And as a matter of fact, I remember going through one neighbor's house over here with my radio, and they're just great people. So never had any problems with it.
My sense is that's also kind of Minnesota, don't you think?
It could be, but I think humans everywhere are, essentially, they're great people. They want to help. They're great people.
Yeah, I think that's true. What is the ham radio club that you belong to, and what role do you play in it?
It's Winona Amateur Radio Club, and I am a club officer. And for the most part, I'm kind of active as more technical, as I mentioned, put together and kind of maintain the system up at the tower for the remote access, the HF radio remote access. There's quite a number of guys that'll help put up antennas and things like that, and help me do some troubleshooting and stuff like that. So working on that. Also, one of the more recent projects, it was we had a repeater that unfortunately dropped on an FAA frequency down at about 122 megahertz, and so we just immediately took the repeater off the air. And so I've been working on trying to get that resolved, and found a couple of problems with that. And also just kind of helping with the different things, like we have the Minnesota QSO party. We have a group that gets together and operates station. We do field day, things like that. There's also one of the things our club is really good at is helping in the community. There's the Ride the Ridges, which is I believe it's a Lions Club. They have a bicycle ride during the fall, and our club handles communication with that, which also includes APRS, and it's really great to see the APRS, full-size screen shows where all of the different vans are and things like that. So our club gets active in that. There's the Trinona, which is a triathlon type thing, kind of a smaller version, and our club helps with the communication with that. So Skywarn and things like that. So just I kind of help the club.
And now this message from QRP Labs. QRP Labs has shipped thousands of QCX QRP transceivers kits to date. The odds of working another QCX user gets better every day. If you're looking for a satisfying kit experience where you end up with an amazing performing QRP transceiver for under $50, let me say that again, for under $50, then you owe it to yourself to go to QRP Labs. We have many home brewers who listen to the QSO Today podcast. For you, QRP Labs also has parts, filters, enclosures, and other handy devices to make your home brewing experience even better. You can use these parts to either enhance your QRP Labs kits or to beef up your own homebrew designs. Be sure to browse Hand's entire website. Use the link on this week's show notes page or the one in the sponsored section of the QSO Today website to get to QRP Labs to buy your QCX or any of the other fine QRP Labs kits or parts. QRP Labs is my go-to ham radio kit company. It should be yours too. QRP Labs. And now back to our QSO Today. It's my understanding from, I guess, an interview I must have done a week or two ago that APRS can also be used if you have a smartphone. So you don't necessarily have to have an amateur radio with APRS in order to be seen on the map.
Yes, and the nice thing is there's some of the newer radios, and actually mine isn't all that new, but the FT1D has APRS built in, so it can track anywhere, and as a transmitter, and then anyone with a browser can find out where that track is at.
How important do you think ham radio clubs are to amateur radio success?
Very much so. It kind of keeps people excited and exchange of ideas and things like that. I remember one of the early clubs that I was in Laverne. I think that was probably what really kept me interested in it. And I don't know. I guess our club, we've been complaining a little bit lately that we're kind of the fat old men, and we want to get some new blood going. And actually, in listening to one of your podcasts with Fred Kemmer, AB1 OC, I listened to him in your podcast, and I was really intrigued because there have been a few new hams that we've had in the area that I've helped to get started. I had mentioned that I'd loaned out my SB101 to a family, and there was also another young ham that just got his license, and our club has an extra radio, so sent that over to his place, and finding that it's more than just giving them, getting them to have the license, but you also have to kind of give them a boost afterward. And kind of because of that podcast, I kind of presented something to our club in hopes that we can get something going. And I really do want to get some more licensing going. And the other thing we talked about was doing follow-up after the licensing. And I'm really excited about that. Like I said, I just had a ball helping these people and just seeing all the enthusiasm they have. They're getting on the remote and making contacts and getting on their radios. What I did was in a couple of cases, I gave them the parts to build an antenna, the ZS6BKW, which is a great multi-band antenna. And rather than just giving them the antenna, I let them build it. And I think there's a lot more involvement, that way. Not so much an appliance operator, but they start to learn what you can build.
Well, I think that as hams who've been doing it for a lot of years, we kind of take for granted really how hard it is to actually put a PL259 connector on a piece of RG8, for example. It requires maybe some skills that are not widely used anymore.
Right. And you do need to get your hands in there and learn how all of that works.
Right. I think it's great. The episode that you're referring to is episode 280 of the QSO Today podcast, and at this point you can still scroll down on the homepage and find it. Fred and his wife have really done amazing things with their club in terms of creating opportunities for new operators, and I think the follow-up is really important. Well, that sounds great. Does it seem to you also that a lot of old-timer hams, like you, have a lot of equipment available oftentimes? I think we all have stuff under the bench that we're not using that we could help a new ham get on the air.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm hoping that my son gets his general license. He did get his technician license here this last year, hoping he gets his general, and I'll get him started as well.
It seems to me the technicians still have some privileges on HF. What do you think about putting him through a quote-unquote novice experience in order to kind of give him that? With smartphones and everything like that, maybe that's not a great idea, but what do you think about the novice experience for a technician?
I don't know that, like in my son Tony's case, KE0PXK, I don't know that he would do that. It was really a surprise when Fred had mentioned AB10C that one of the top interests of new hams is a CW. That was a surprise to me, but I just kind of wonder if Tony would do something like that. I would like to see the FCC make some changes to the novice so that they could use, some of the new digital modes and things like that in HF.
Like FT8.
Exactly.
I think that's a great idea. That would certainly attract younger hams, I think, and let them start as technicians. What kind of impact has amateur radio had on your family life? Building an amplifier for a year seems like it might have some time impact.
Yeah, my wife has been extremely patient. As a matter of fact, even last night, she came in and she said something about, she said, I can tell you're in the zone. I was working on a modification to one of my pieces of gear, and I do get into the zone. And ever since I've been retired, I've spent a lot more time with the ham radio. She does sometimes complain that she's a ham radio widow in some of the evenings when I get on with the group and stuff like that. But no, she's been very supportive with it, and I don't remember that it really impacted the kids that much when they were growing up, but our kids are all growing and doing well.
What do you think is the greatest challenge facing ham radio now?
I would probably say getting new hams into into our ranks and getting them started. Getting them interested and doing follow-up. As I mentioned, when I talked to our club executive meeting here a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about trying to set up something to get people trained in an amateur radio, but more importantly, I think, is to have the follow-up, because we've had quite a number of like college students and different people that have taken their test, and they pick up a small handheld, and there just isn't enough traffic on the repeaters, so they kind of lose interest and you don't hear from them again. But just to have some kind of follow-up to keep them excited, and I really like what the ARRL is doing in trying to coming out with a new magazine for the young and the new hams and things like that. So it's probably getting new hams going.
I've actually found that with DMR. For all my listeners who are DMR followers, I'm afraid I'm just not liking it. And I'm not liking it because it's so subdivided getting on the air that most of the talk groups I go on, nobody's listening. Nobody's there. It's a challenge, I think perhaps even putting new hams on DMR might be a mistake, unless they're on one of the nationwide or worldwide talk groups.
Correct. Yeah. Our club here is into the Yaesu Fusion system, and we did have the Wires X connected up to our system, and that gave you the ability to talk to different rooms, different people in different areas, and things like that. But it seemed to be more that. It got to be too much noise. I remember years ago back in Sioux Falls, we would get on the 2-meter repeater all the time, to and from work and things like that. But you just don't seem to hear that anymore. And so that's why my concern is with these new hams coming in, that there are so many facets of amateur radio. There different things that you can get into and just have a ball with it. Whether it be moon bounce, FT8, building amplifiers, antennas, different things like that. It's just so many things that once you get somebody started, it kind of gets the ball rolling.
But I think everyone needs a mentor, at least at the beginning. I think there are over almost 800,000 licensees in America, and the majority of them are not on the air.
Yes, I wasn't aware of that, but it doesn't surprise me. Yeah, you do need somebody to kind of get you going, and I think that's probably why, I know you often ask about the Elmer, who your Elmer was, and I'll be honest with you, I love being an Elmer, trying to help some of these people. It's a great time.
Yes, me too. I like it naturally, and I think it's because I had so many great Elmers as a kid growing up. What excites you the most about what's happening in amateur radio?
The things that the digital modes, the remote control access and things like that, it's become so much easier, so much more straightforward. As I mentioned, you can be driving down the road and with just your phone, and I use a Bluetooth headset for talking on the radio and stuff like that, and then I can have a little remote clicker that does the push to talk for me. And you can get on the air driving down the road, chat, and do your rag chewing and all that. There are even some guys that'll do that CW, and I applaud them for it.
With their Android smartphone, they're actually doing CW?
Yeah, the one that I was aware of had a laptop that he used.
Do you have an article, or do you have some references in terms of the clicker that you're using and the Bluetooth heads that you might be using? I see that as kind of an opportunity as well, in order to, especially in areas where I don't have repeater coverage.
Actually, probably the best advice I could give is looking on the remote hams. There's a forum. There's a series of forums. The General is usually the one that's used for that, and also for the Android. So looking on there, I happen to use one of the VXI Blue Parrot headsets. It's a noise canceling. A lot of truckers use them, that sort of thing. That works very, very well. You get really good audio reception and transmission with that. Most people can't tell you're on a remote.
And what's the push-to-talk device that you're using?
I don't remember. It's just a very inexpensive thing off an eBay. It was it's used as a shutter control for your camera. And there is a setting in the Android app which says, which button do you want to use for transmit. And so you connect this up first and then go into that and put a check on that and click your button, and that then becomes your push to talk.
You've given me an idea. I just bought a remote control to advance PowerPoint slides that has a little Bluetooth dongle that plugs into the PC. That actually might also work in this case. So you've given me an idea for a new project. What advice would you give to new or returning hams to the hobby?
Find something that you're really interested in, that you like, and see where that takes you. Somebody returning, the new radios that have come out are just kind of amazing. I remember way back when, I had my Heathkit rigs. That was kind of the going radio at the time, back in the 70s, the early 70s. But nowadays, with the ICOM 7300 and some of these other radios that are out there, the Yaesu FT991A and stuff, it's amazing what the technology is doing. And you can just explore the different things that are out there. I'm not so much into the UHF VHF stuff, but I know there's a lot of guys that enjoy doing that. And moon bounce with WSJT and stuff like that is kind of within anybody's grasp. Got a friend that used to do that with an array of I think about 8 Cushcraft beams in an array to do moon bounce and a kilowatt, and now you can do that with a 100-watt station. So it's really amazing what you can do.
Especially, I think the Europeans are doing it 100-watt stations with long antennas, 24 elements or something like that, but they're doing it when the moon's on the horizon.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So they don't need to have the pan tilt. They just follow the moon at the horizon and make their contacts that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's amazing, like I say, what technology is doing these days.
Well, Mike, you've been a terrific guest, and it's been a lot of fun to ragchew. This is kind of like the ragchew that you would do on 80 meters at night.
Oh, absolutely.
You were a little nervous, you said to me in an email this morning about coming on the QSO Today podcast, and I said it's just like a regular QSO. So I hope that that's the way you felt about it. It was really a pleasure to have you on the QSO Today podcast. So with that, I want to wish you 73, and thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and 73.
That concludes this episode of QSO Today. I hope that you enjoyed this QSO with Mike. Please be sure to check out the show notes that include links and information about the topics that we discussed. Go to www.qsotoday.com and put in W0IH in the search box at the top of the page. My thanks to both ICOM America and QRP Labs for their support of the QSO Today podcast. Please show your support of these fine sponsors by clicking on their links in the show notes pages, or when you make your purchases, that you say that you heard it here on QSO Today. You may notice that some of the episodes are transcribed into written text. If you'd like to sponsor this or any of the other episodes into written text, please contact me. Support the QSO Today podcast by first joining the QSO Today email list by pressing the subscribe buttons on the show notes pages. I will not spam you or share your email address with anyone. Become a listener sponsor monthly or annually by clicking on the sponsor buttons on the show notes page. I am grateful for any way that you show appreciation and support. It makes a big difference. QSO Today is now available on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, and TuneIn, as well as the iTunes Store. If you own an Amazon Echo, you can say, "Alicia, play the QSO Today podcast from TuneIn." I still use Stitcher to listen to podcasts on my smartphone. The links to all of these services are on the show notes pages on the right side. Until next time, this is Eric Foerster W0IH 73. The QSO Today podcast is a product of KEG Media Inc., who is solely responsible for its content.